Hey guys, so we're going to be looking at scatter plots and how they work. And the biggest thing about scatter plots is understanding the vocabulary that goes with it. So to start out with, scatter plots are graphs that use points to display numerical data with two variables or bivariate data. So bi means two and variable variate, so bivariate data. Scatterplots can help determine if one variable has an effect on the other, or if there's an overall trend, pattern, or association. So, association between the variables. You may also hear association, a correlation. And what those basically are just saying, is there a relationship between the two pieces of data? So if Susie went to the mall and surveyed shoppers to see how many items they purchased and the total amount of money they spent at the mall, she created the scatter plot below. So it says, how many shoppers did Susie survey? If we count all the little dots up here, she surveyed 16 different people. So if you notice down here, the number of items, as the number of items increases, for example, if they bought one item, they only spent this much money. If they bought 3 items, they spent this much money. 8 items, they're spending this much money up here. So the question is does the number of items purchased, so the more items I start to buy, does it affect how much money the shopper spent? And if we notice, the more items somebody purchased, the more money they began to spend. So there is a relationship between those things, and it seems, the more items, like I just said, the more items people bought, the more money they spent. Now, there's 3 different types of association that we can look at. There's positive association or correlation, and I'm going to write correlation down here because you are going to see this word occasionally, and you're going to hear us use it also. So a positive association or correlation, a negative association or correlation, or no association or correlation. Again, that just means, is there a relationship between the two things? Is there a positive relationship, negative relationship, or no relationship at all? So 2 variables have positive or association when the variables move together. For example, as one variable increases, the other variable also increases. So we just saw that up here. As the more items somebody bought, the more money was spent. And we can look at that as I'm increasing on my x-axis, my y-axis is also increasing. To have a negative association or correlation, 2 variables have a negative association when the variables move in opposite directions. For example, as one variable increases, so as this one is increasing, as my x is increasing, my y value is decreasing. So as one increases, the other decreases. Now, 2 variables have no association when the change in one variable has no effect on the second variable. And just to give you an example of that, someone's IQ and how fast they can run. There's no relationship between someone's IQ and how fast they run. So that's kind of an example of no correlation. So it says, describe the type of association you'd expect to see between the following. So if we looked at the hours a person studies and the number of states they visited. So the more hours someone studies, so as that's going up, does it have any effect on the number of states they visited? Probably not, right? So that would be no association. So the hour a person studies, that would go up, and their grade on an exam. Typically, the more you study, the better your grades are. So they are both increasing together. So that would be a positive association. The hours a person studies, so the more someone studies, they probably end up watching less TV. So they're going in opposite directions, meaning that that would have a negative association. Now, there's a couple of things that we have to look at when we're looking at this. If a straight line can be drawn to follow the overall trend of a scatter plot. So for example, if I'm looking at this data, I can kind of draw a straight line through this data right here. So if a straight line can be drawn to follow an overall trend of a scatter plot, it is linear. Remember, straight line. If the points of data are close together, the association is strong. So if they're close together, and we're going to look at some examples down here. So if the dots are close together, it has a strong relationship, a strong correlation. If the points of data are widely spread, the association is weak. And that kind of makes sense. If they're closer together, that's strong. If they're further apart, it's weak. So we're going to look at each one of these and we're going to determine if it has a positive, negative, no association, if it has a strong or weak association, and if it is linear or not. So if I look at this first one, it is increasing, and I can draw a straight line in there, and the dots are pretty close together. So I know that this is increasing here and increasing here, so I know it has a positive association. It is strong because my dots are close together, and I can draw a straight line in it, making it linear. If I look at this next one, notice how it's still increasing like the first one was, but my dots aren't as close together. I can still, though, make that straight line inside of there. So it's positive, but this one is weak because the dots aren't as close together and it is still linear. This next one, if you notice, my dots are all close together. It's increasing, but this time I have a curve in my data. So I still have positive. It's strong, but it is non-linear. Now my next one is going down. Kind of like when we talked about slope, right? If I read it from right to left, if it was going up, it was a positive slope. If I read it from right to left, or I'm sorry, from left to right, I said that so wrong. If I read it from left to right, if it was increasing, then it was positive. If I read it from left to right and it's going down, then it is negative, just like slope would be. So this would be negative. My dots are close together, so it is strong. And I can draw a straight line through it, making it linear. On the following one, if I read it from left to right, it's going down, but it kind of has a curve here. So it's negative. My points aren't as close together, so it is weak, and it is nonlinear because it has a curve. The last one, if you look at that, there's dots everywhere, meaning that there's no relationship going on at all in what is happening. So this one is going to have no association, in which then if it has no association, there's a weak correlation to it, or weak association, and obviously I can't draw a straight line in there, so it is non-linear. So I'm going to go over these last few things and then you're going to practice yourself. So a person's height and a person's shoe size. So the taller a person is, typically their shoe size is also bigger, right? So that would be a positive association. The number of letters in a person's name. So if I have more letters in my name, does that affect my IQ? Probably not. So this would have no association. The number of absences a student has. So typically if you have more absences, your GPA is usually lower. So I'm going in opposite directions. And it helps if you draw these arrows with it because it makes you see if they're going the same direction or opposite directions. So this would be negative, because as one's increasing, the other is decreasing. So this would be a negative association. Then I am going to look at these last few and I'm going to match the graph with the situation. So the temperature outside and the total gallons of gas sold at a gas station. So the hotter it gets outside, does that affect the number of gallons sold at a gas station? Probably not, right? So this one over here has no association. The size of a home, so the bigger your home is, the cost of monthly utilities. Typically a bigger home requires more utilities, so they would both be increasing. And if I notice here, this is increasing, so I would have B here. The altitude of a hiker, so the higher you go on a mountain, what happens with the oxygen? Less oxygen in the air. So as I'm getting higher on the mountain, the amount of oxygen is dropping, which is terrible. It makes you feel like you're going to suffocate. It's awful. So that's kind of like the main big parts to it. You really need to understand about the positive, negative, no association and how that works. You need to understand about linear and it having like linear and nonlinear. So linear creating a straight line and nonlinear not having a straight line. And then, understanding about a weak and a strong correlation, because that's also important. If you have any questions, make sure you ask. And then you have these problems to work on your own.